Good morning. Welcome to OEN Engage. Thank you for joining us for today's session, the Introduction to OER Adoption workshop. My name is Tanya Groves, and I'm the Director of Educational Programs for the Open Education Network. And I have just a few housekeeping items for you. We kicked off the week with the OEN Land Acknowledgement and the OEN Community Norms. If you'd like to review them, you can find them at the links that I'm just about to post in the chat. In addition, if you'd like to share about the things you're viewing and learning and seeing, feel free to post on our social media, which I've also posted in the chat. We welcome you to share your local land acknowledgement in the chat if you'd like to do that, or you can visit the Native Land Digital site to learn about the lands that our community members inhabit and dig deeper into our relationships with our heritage and how we can actively be a part of a better future moving forward. This session is being recorded to benefit those in our community who are unable to attend, and the link shall be shared out after the event. If you have comments or questions during this session, please submit them via chat. We'll do our very best to address them. And now let's welcome our presenters, Cheryl Casey from the University of Arizona and Meggie Mapes from the University of Kansas. They are open education rock stars. So thank you, Cheryl and Meggie, for presenting for us today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Yes, welcome. And I am Cheryl Casey. I've been involved in open education work since about 2014 and will be an instructor in the Certificate for Open Education Librarianship program again next year. Meggie, would you like to pop on and say hi?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to spend this morning with you. I'm Meggie Mapes from the University of Kansas. I've been a presenter with the OEN since 2019. I've authored an open textbook and really try to integrate open into all of my sort of teaching and talking points, both in and out of work. So very, very excited to be here with you. Thanks, Cheryl.
Sure. So this is the Train the Trainer session that Meggie and I present to systems and consortia. We want you to see how it works and how it might be customized for your own local needs. The slide deck is openly licensed, so you can adapt it for your own workshops. Typically, we present this as a 3-hour workshop. And today we have just under 2 hours. We're skipping some of the content like the overview of the Open Education Network, detailed instructions for participants on taking care of themselves. We're shortening the break from 10 minutes to 5 minutes, and we've shortened some of the activity times. We're also going to use Poll Everywhere instead of the typical breakout rooms that we use, and that way the recording will be ongoing throughout the session. So here's the suggested citation for the slide deck and the link to the deck if you would like to customize it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so when we're presenting to consortia or systems, we typically allow time before the slide for leaders from those systems or consortia to introduce themselves and share important information. We also invite participants at this time to introduce themselves in the chat, and so we invite you to do that at this time. And it's always good to see who's in the room and where everyone is from. Eileen, thank you for sharing your land statement, land acknowledgement. So I see we have people here from Illinois, Ohio, Berkshire Community College. Oh my goodness, now it's going super fast. Washington, D.C., Missouri, Texas, Florida, South Carolina, Connecticut, Washington, Ohio, Minnesota, Virginia, oh, the UK. Welcome, Will. Thank you for joining us at this time of day. Pennsylvania, Missouri, New York, Florida, Virginia, Texas, California, Massachusetts, Indiana. This is fabulous. We're so glad you're all here with us today for this 2-hour introduction to the Train the Trainer workshop. Okay, next slide, please, Maggie. So our goal for today is to equip you with tools, techniques, and strategies to build and sustain open education initiatives on your own campus. During our time together, we're going to talk about barriers to open textbook adoptions. We're going to discuss strategies for raising faculty awareness, educating, and engaging. Maggie and I are going to practice strategies for responding to skeptics and criticism of open education. Typically, we give you practice time too, but that's one of the things we've had to shorten today. We're going to plan next steps. We're going to answer your questions, and hopefully this will be a great time for you to get to know new folks and to get new ideas for trainings at your institution. When we do this session with breakout sessions, we encourage people to leave their cameras on. It's up to you whether you want to leave your cameras on or off today. We encourage you to take care of your needs throughout this 2-hour session. Be gentle with ourselves. If there are technology snafus, hopefully there won't be. We want to join together and create a space that's safe and open and generous and honest and productive. So community is at the heart of the OEN. And as we heard David Ernst say yesterday, as a community, we can accomplish so much more together than we can separately. Through action-based strategies, shared solutions, best practices, and action, we can learn from each other and strengthen our OER initiatives. So some of the strategies include the Pub 101 resources, the access to Manifold, the Pressbooks discount, the upcoming Ketty pilot. Some of the shared solutions include the community hub and the data dashboard, the slide decks that are available for you to adapt, the open textbook library. And as far as best practices, there are the certificate programs, the colleague connector program, all kinds of guides and templates available to you, and the expertise from your colleagues around the country and around the world. And as far as action, we have the working groups, the listserv that I find so helpful, and of course, this summer Engage event and the new scholarship matchmaking program. So throughout the OEN, we want to share our successes and strategize ways to overcome challenges. And that's what we're going to address now. Open education work can be extremely rewarding, but it isn't easy. And this activity is one that participants really seem to embrace. We brainstorm barriers to faculty adoption of open textbooks. It's important to surface the issues that stand in our way so that we can think of ways to overcome them. And in the 3-hour workshop format, we typically allow 5 minutes for this activity. Since this is a condensed version, we're going to give you 2 minutes to write down as many barriers as you can think of. When I do this as an in-person session, I usually provide Post-it notes for people to fill out, and people will just do piles of it. The tables will be covered. And that's great. We encourage people to go for quantity. Unclog those pipes, do a brain dump, write down everything you can think of, whether it's real or perceived. Just get it all out. And remember, there are no right answers because we can't address the concerns and issues if we don't name them. So we will now give you 2 minutes to do some writing. Sarah, let's hold off on doing them in the chat. We will do that next, but just go ahead and jot them on your phone or on a piece of paper or on your computer for now. Good question. Okay, I think it's been about 2 minutes. So we'll go on to the next slide. And typically, this is where we will divide people into breakout rooms for 15 minutes. We encourage them to introduce themselves when they get into the breakout rooms because building connections is an important part of this training. And we instruct participants to share their individual responses and to look for commonalities and differences. We also advise people to be respectful of confidentiality. Today, though, instead of using breakout rooms, we're going to use Poll Everywhere. And Maggie is going to show this QR code. So you can either use your camera to take a picture of the QR code and follow the link, or you can use the Poll Everywhere link that Maggie just dropped in the chat. And so Sarah was asking, list the barriers in the chat. We're going to try this Poll Everywhere software to list some of the barriers that you brainstormed. And this will be a grand experiment. Maggie, do you have advice on the best way to respond in Poll Everywhere as paragraph or individual entries? Nope, just whatever works for you, Stacy. So this is showing us some of the very consistent answers: quality, time, lack of time. I'm guessing those go together. Lack of supplemental materials, commercial alternatives and competition. I see the word perception in multiple forms. I see the word tenure. Oh, we've reached a limit. Okay. That's good to know. This was a test of this software. We have never tried this in a live session before. Oh, bummer. Okay. Well, if you weren't able to get it in the Poll Everywhere, yes, add it to the chat as Mickey suggests. We weren't sure how many people were going to be here today. Thrilled to have 67. So we weren't sure if the chat would be overwhelmed, but yeah, go ahead and add your response to the chat. Faculty seeing OER as lesser. Yes, that is a very common thing that we hear of, or hearing that, oh, my college or my department doesn't respect OER and won't recognize it for tenure and promotion. Not knowing where to start, that's a really, really good one. Individual instructors not having the autonomy to select their own text. The whole department has to agree on it. Yes. Availability, quality, length, automatic textbook billing programs. The person in the department wrote the current text. Yes, we've run into that. Lack of local context, for example, in law. Just the technical aspects of delivering OER is a really common one. Yeah, and getting it into a platform where students can access it. Lack of incentives. There's going to be a session this afternoon with Engage talking about what to do if you can't pay faculty. How do we work with faculty to compensate and motivate and reward if there's no money to pay them? Yes, I see that complacency with commercial textbook packages. Yeah, the course in a box is just so convenient. And I hear faculty say so many times, I need that courseware. I have to have the courseware. And they may not be able to find it with all of the OER. Instructors being adjuncts. Yeah, we run into that with the lack of training for last minute adjunct hires. And I remember doing a new faculty orientation session last year talking about the importance of textbook adoptions and how the library can support faculty with free to use resources and OER. And someone raised their hand and said, "What's a textbook adoption?" I thought, wow, they are not getting the support that they need. Yeah, the lack of ancillary materials for sure, and those supplemental quizzes, PowerPoints. Fears of AI content. We were just talking about that before we allowed everyone into the room, and how AI content is just changing higher education. Uh, and this goes along with those quality questions that sometimes publishers themselves will bring up, um, trying to undermine OER. Oh, accessibility, that's a really good one. Yeah. Misunderstanding students' real financial constraints. I I run into this one, and it's so frustrating. I remember having a someone from our fundraising unit say, "Well, why would we fundraise for OER? Because, donors are just going to think that if we save money for students on textbooks, they're just going to spend it on beer." And I remember my jaw just completely dropped. I thought, wow, that shows a real lack of understanding about the severe challenges that our students are facing in terms of food insecurity, housing insecurity, childcare, medical care, mental health care, all of those student basic needs. Yes. Okay, we could go on and on and on. And the political climate, oh, yes. Making additional work exhausting. Yes, totally agree. Uh, so hopefully you can see that there are a lot of commonalities in the answers and a lot of themes. And by seeing these commonalities, we hope that you feel less alone in the challenges that you're facing. Um, Everything listed here is valid. And having done these trainings multiple times now, the good news is that we can address a lot of them. And so I'm going to pass things off to Meggie to explain more.
Just like Cheryl had mentioned, we want to underscore that these are absolutely real challenges. And I think, like many of you, we're feeling more intensity of some of these challenges in our current climate. So I can always find it helpful for me when I'm looking at what all of you are experiencing to really ask myself, are some of these challenges, even though I haven't experienced them, are they still happening on my campus so that we can, again, begin to have an awareness about what those challenges are so that we can have a good answer, that we can make sure that we have the resources in order to facilitate for our colleagues a better understanding about what open can provide. And again, the good news is that if we know the challenges, if we know those obstacles, then we're able to address them. And that's exactly what we do when we think about leading workshops for faculty and staff. So we do a number of things to address the challenges that you all brainstormed. And the faculty workshop and even partner workshop is really meant to equip faculty and staff with tools to instill participants with awareness, with education, and with engagement. Each of these are part of our strategy. And while it appears to be linear in nature, of course it isn't. When we think about awareness, for example, one thing I often do for my colleagues is every time we get that semester email that says, hey, it's time for you to announce what books you're going to use for your fall or spring semester, I always share out an email that includes links to things like the Open Textbook Library, just so, again, they have an awareness about what's possible for them to adopt or adapt moving forward. We also educate. So holding a workshop, of course, is an example of how you can assist in educating faculty. I've also known and noticed for myself that the more I do those smaller scale strategies to raise awareness, the more my colleagues in my own department and other departments start to come to me asking questions in an attempt to have more education on their own. So, of course, having a workshop is what we would call a higher impact strategy because it takes time to plan and conduct. But as you all know, the OEN does such a fabulous job of providing you all with resources to make you feel more comfortable in taking that first step to lead that workshop. And we do these strategies of awareness and engagement in attempt to move toward, or excuse me, awareness and education, an attempt to move towards engagement. So we want faculty to really start engaging with open to get a better understanding of how those open resources might work or be applied within their own courses. And that's really the workshop strategy. So again, you can see here where the open textbook library makes faculty aware that there are actually open options for them to consider. Again, the workshop strategy helps faculty understand what open textbooks actually are. And that workshop is an opportunity for you to explicitly, face to face on Zoom or in person, with your colleagues address some of those misconceptions and concerns. How can we help folks truly understand the financial situation that students are placed in and how that financial situation can impact their ability to participate within those faculty courses? At the end of that workshop, then, is where you have the hook for engagement. Because once you're able to introduce that information to faculty, faculty are then invited to review a textbook at the end of the workshop. So select a textbook in the open textbook library that's within the realm of their expertise. And then they have an opportunity to dig into the book to decide for themselves whether or not it could work for their course and then actually offer a review. So again, I've noticed that I can say until I'm blue in the face, answers or have conversations about many of the misconceptions, but it oftentimes does unimaginable wonders to just give faculty an opportunity to look and to ask the same questions of the book that they would of a more traditional method. So you can see again here visually a bit how that workshop strategy really assists in thinking about how you can help faculty have a better understanding of what open is and how it might be beneficial, not just for students, but also for themselves. So again, we can see here that the open textbook library is that first strategy of awareness, making folks aware. If you aren't aware, right now the open textbook library has over 1,500 books in a myriad of different disciplines. So again, sharing out that link to the open textbook library can be incredibly beneficial. Now, when we share, we often get the question of, wait a second, are open books really any good? In fact, that quality question is one that we saw come up when you all began to identify barriers. That faculty have this question that we're sitting in our basement writing open textbooks, that there's no formal procedures or processes that help create a kind of rigorous book. But rather than answer that question wholeheartedly, are they any good by saying, of course, every open book is amazing, which would be an unfair and uncredible response. What you can do is actually point, as this slide does, to the reviews that faculty have done when they have engaged with a book in their own area. So what you can see here is that there are a huge majority of books who have that 4.5 to 5 rating on a scale. So it provides faculty with an opportunity to communicate with one another once they're able to do that faculty review. Rather than answering the question, then, are they any good? Again, you can just point to this data and remind faculty that when the OEN invites faculty to conduct a review of a textbook, that they are soliciting honest reviews, not seeking good reviews. The OEN does not edit any of the reviews. In fact, as soon as that faculty finishes, it posts on the open textbook library just as that faculty had intended. We know then that the faculty workshop strategy actually works. So these workshops have been done hundreds, maybe thousands of times now with tens of thousands of faculty who have indicated, as you can see here, at 45% an intention to adopt. That's a pretty incredible amount. 45% of faculty indicating interest in adopting a book after they had an opportunity to review. But I also think always that 27% maybe category is a really substantial data point because that's a my husband's in sales, what he might call a warm lead, where you have an opportunity to re-engage with that faculty base, to really think about what they might need or what additional support or resources could help as they're really considering whether or not adoption of a book could really be for them. But we know that this workshop and corresponding review of an open textbook in the OTL are just a kind of couple ways to engage faculty. They're actually a lot. And that's for us where we engage faculty in that kind of workshop strategy. And this would be kind of the opening slide of that faculty workshop, which I'll walk you through here in a bit, about access, affordability, and academic success. And like we'd mentioned, faculty are invited to review a book of their choice at the end of that workshop, that engagement strategy, where we know that 74% of faculty who participate in a workshop review. So just kind of think about that entire narrative that we just discussed. I know I'm a public speaking coach, I'm a director, my book is about public speaking. And sometimes I know folks, when we pitch the idea of a workshop, think, oh my gosh, no way, there's no way that I could put myself on the line and do a presentation. But I promise you that with the resources from the OEN, the slide decks, your ability to adapt that workshop in a way that feels good to you will have a really substantial impact, because the data tells us that not only do 74% of those faculty review, that 45% of that populace says they have an intention of adopting, and 27% are really interested. So we know when we say that the workshop strategy works, that it does. So again, when we think, though, about those strategies, the workshop strategy, sharing out the open textbook library link, chatting with a colleague, those are just a few of the strategies that are possible for us to really address some of those barriers that we initially mentioned. So we're going to ask that you, for 2 minutes, just on your own, write down what are some ways or things that you already do to raise awareness with faculty. How do you already try to engage? So take about 2 minutes, and then we'll try the poll again. We might do less words, and we'll also kind of course, engage with the chat. But before we do so, just on your own, take those 2 minutes. Like Cheryl mentioned, in the longer workshop, we would do 5 minutes, or usually a few more minutes on your own, and then a breakout session. But we're going to truncate that here. So take a few minutes here first to brainstorm anything that comes to mind about what you have done. Okay, great. So let's try to share some of the strategies, actually. And if you're interested, we can try this again. If we use the poll, it might be easier to try 1 to 2 words, but you're also welcome in the chat to really highlight what are some of those strategies that you have been utilizing or that you've seen utilized on your campus or with colleagues. Ah, excellent. We have a ton here, workshop series, different surveys. You know, I love the idea of having a survey, of course, as a researcher, because I know it often gives us data to figure out what do folks already know? What are folks really asking for? Having a lot of those one-on-one conversations is also really incredible. The idea of having a newsletter. So I know at KU Libraries, for example, we have a communication team that does a lot of work that tries to highlight and share wins that are happening with faculty. And oftentimes they'll not only share out a newsletter, but they'll reach out to, for example, department chairs or deans to highlight some of that work that may otherwise be invisibilized. Absolutely, faculty development workshops, having liaisons that can really connect with faculty. I share links to open textbooks when I learn of new ones. Absolutely. I think what can happen for me is the OTL is so incredible, but having a pulse on what new is coming out can help faculty who are sorting or really trying to figure out for the first time what might work. Library published OER. I was really lucky that I was able to work with KU Libraries to really publish what my open textbook became, and their support around things like Pressbooks was beyond helpful to answer some of the questions that I had about copyright, for example. Yes, blogging. I love that, to show about the process. Getting a few minutes in a department meeting. I've heard this one, and I also think it is so beneficial to say, hey, do you have 5 minutes in your next faculty meeting where I could chat? And even if that faculty department chair says no, being able to follow up with, well, would you mind sharing this flyer that has some information? Yeah, doing some outreach, having information sessions with centers of faculty excellence. We also have at KU the Center for Teaching Excellence, which is another location that really helps kind of send out or connect. So really asking, where are other places on campus that are connectors that if we're able to be in collaboration, they might have faculty who share needs with them that they're able to, kind of send them your way. Having a LibGuide is really, really important. I teach a graduate level pedagogy course, and I've worked with librarians who have created LibGuides that show open resources that have been incredible when our new graduate teaching assistants are really trying to figure out what additional supplemental resources they'd like to use. You can never go wrong with an OER grant and being able to incentivize. And of course, you can never go wrong with schmoozing, of course. Having discipline specific information, offering a workshop series. Yes, especially if there's an OER certificate. Again, more of that newsletter. You all have such incredible, incredible strategies. And what I really encourage is as we sort of finish taking a look here, to write down what's a strategy that got mentioned today that you could try and implement on your own campus. If you aren't quite yet at the threshold of feeling comfortable doing a workshop, being able to, for example, hold on-site office hours, having open coffee with different faculty, or figuring out if there are other faculty groups that you could have face-to-face time with. I've also found that data is incredibly important when trying to figure out how to increase awareness and education. Yes, providing guides, templates, different workshops, emailing out available webinars. Again, yes, having faculty OER awards. On KU's campus, not only do the libraries have they have a kind of KU textbook hero, but also our KU Student Senate became really involved and wanted to incentivize. So they became a partner, and they also created a kind of annual faculty textbook award. Different exhibits, yes, highlight faculty. So again, you can see there are so many strategies at your fingertips as you're trying to figure out, especially if there's less OER conversation that's happening on your campus, you might feel overwhelmed that there are so many different strategies, lower stakes or higher stakes, as you work on that idea of awareness, education, and engagement. Thank you all so much. Now, when we think about um, the workshop strategy, I won't do the entire faculty workshop for you, but what I think is important is to just give you a couple reminders of key concepts that are from the faculty engagement workshop. And I'm going to kind of talk to you both as if you are the faculty in that workshop, but we're also going to have a bird's eye view. So I'll be transparent about some of the choices I make. One of the things I'll always highlight when you think about using the workshop is, this is, like I'd mentioned, an incredible template and slide deck for you to begin using with faculty. But as a communication scholar, I want to remind you, you will have the best engagement with faculty if you integrate your own experiences, if you share some of your own OER stories, if you're able to really think about crafting this and adapting this workshop to address some of the main issues that your faculty are addressing or dealing with, or what your students are dealing with on your campus. So when we think about this faculty workshop, it really introduces faculty to issues that students face and presents open as one possible solution to addressing some of those problems. The workshop, because of that, uses a problem and solution format to make it easier. And we begin really by introducing faculty to the problem. Now, we share this initial UN Declaration of Human Rights, and often when I present, I often, before sharing this slide, will ask faculty to share with me, what motivates you to be here? I don't mean here in the workshop, I mean here in education. I don't know if it's the pay, for example, but what keeps us coming back? And often what you'll notice with faculty is that their values align very clearly with the UN Declaration of Human Rights, that higher education should be accessible to all. So it kind of grounds us and it unifies us when you remind faculty as you start what's motivating them. We can get bogged down in the grind of the day-to-day and worrying about where our next research money is going to come from and answering these emails. So I found it helpful even for myself to remind myself, what am I doing here? What wakes me up every day? And you'll learn then again that having an equitable access to education is often that unifying component, that unifying value. And unfortunately, as we know, unfortunately, more and more, it seems that we're not really living up to this promise. That having accessible education doesn't just mean a physical space, but it also means making sure that students have access to the multidimensional ways that learning occur. And we know, unfortunately, that we might not be living up to the promise because, for example, students face incredible financial barriers. So this is an example of Minnesota. And what you do in your workshop is you customize it to your own state to really kind of highlight the change in percentage from tuition that students paid in 1980 compared to today. And what you can see and what we know to be true is that tuition costs have risen alarmingly. So for me in the state of Kansas, it's gone from 23% to 45%. Students will tell us, they've been telling us that the cost of education has shifted. The burden of that cost has shifted to students. And that burden disproportionately affects students with households that are low or moderate income households. So we're aware of the issue most often from a tuition standpoint, but we also know that there are other costs that students face. Things like tuition and fees, housing, personal expenses, and transportation. And I always joke with faculty, maybe one day someone will come knock on my door and ask me for advice about how to solve the tuition crisis. I have ideas. So far, that has not been the case. So instead, we invite them to really ask and to think of all of these. Which do you think that we're going to be really talking about in the workshop today? And that's, of course, books and supplies. This is important because it reminds faculty that, especially in a sea of overwhelm, feeling like we're powerless, that there are places that faculty have a tremendous amount of autonomy to make decisions that have a tremendous impact on students. And while they might not be aware, it might be something we take for granted because looking at this, books, $1,000 doesn't seem as impactful as that tuition cost. Data tells us that the cost of books and supplies matters to students and it impacts students' experience and success on our campuses. This is one of my favorite surveys to share. I think I probably share these research findings once every few weeks with faculty. And this survey was a survey that was done during March and April of 2018, where more than 21,000 students participated. And they were asked, in your academic career, has the cost of required textbooks caused you to? And you may be unsurprised that 64% of students noted that they didn't purchase the required textbooks because of the cost. But you'll also notice some pretty dire information happening in other places of this survey. That at the bottom, 17% of students reported failing a course. Just shy of 20% of students had failed a course. 18% having to withdraw, to almost nearly 23% dropping, 35% not earning a poor grade. So what we can see here is that the impact, the barrier of our educational materials has a connection to student success. And I also use this data because I don't know about your campus, but our campus has become incredibly, they really care about drop fail withdrawal rates a lot. And faculty are also very aware of enrollment numbers in their courses. So what this data tells us is that the cost of the book might actually be prohibiting students from choosing your course to enroll. And that also means that they're dropping, they're withdrawing, and they're failing courses purely because of the cost of the book. So again, helping frame this data for faculty members can really be important, that this data doesn't exist in a vacuum, that when we contextualize it in relationship to students and in the conversations that are happening on our campus, we can really leverage it in a way that becomes beneficial for faculty and our departments and our units. But there are other educational equity issues outside of affordability that affect students' performance and affect their classroom experience. And that is a sense of belonging in the classroom. We've talked a little bit about students having to shoulder the burden of tuition costs and textbook costs and the potential impact of those barriers. There's more data on that also in the longer slide deck, but we also want to consider the kind of psychological, the psychic messages that we send to students in terms of who belongs and who does not belong based on the need to pay expensive tuition and buy a $100 textbook that likely doesn't reflect the values. It might not even have folks in there that look like them. So these financial barriers and inability to see themselves in the curriculum can have a direct impact on students' sense of belonging, particularly those who come from historically marginalized backgrounds. I always say, students who have access to the rules of the game, who know what we might call the hidden curriculum, where to borrow a textbook, who to ask for when they need to go or we need to have assistance, even what a library could do to help them address some of those financial barriers around books, that insider knowledge can contribute to a sense of belonging. And students without that knowledge can fail to be included, which can have both short and long-term consequences. So this quote here, as you can see, is really impactful. That reads, racially minoritized and first-generation students at four-year institutions are less inclined to feel that same sense of belonging compared to their peers at two-year institutions. So yes, when we think about or we summarize this problem holistically and for faculty, yes, the financial problem is a huge barrier. Yes, that barrier reduces student success. And we want to investigate the kind of educational legacy and flexibility that traditional educational resources might provide versus our solution, which is open. Now, when we introduce faculty to open, we're certainly not saying that open is the only solution, that it will solve any issue or problem that they have on campus. Of course not. But we are introducing them to open as one possible solution. And this next slide is one also that I find incredibly helpful as an educational tool or strategy, which is it helps faculty understand that a model of creating open educational resources already exists. So what you can see on the left-hand side here is what we might understand as a more traditional publishing model, where you have a publisher, it's going to invest in a textbook, students are going to pay that publisher for access, and then they're going to give some peanuts over to that author. Remember, however, that right model demonstrates how open can also create textbooks while reducing that financial barrier, where instead of a publisher, what we have is a college, university, sometimes funded by foundations or government consortia, who will invest in an author to create that textbook to make it freely available for students. So again, this model can really help faculty understand that the model already exists and oftentimes can replicate the same workflow that you would anticipate from a publisher, including things like peer review, for example. This model, of course, or both of these models, however, also require us to help faculty understand the role of copyright, because the model on the left requires, because of traditional copyright, that each student buy an individual copy. But that model wouldn't make sense on the right-hand model, which is why when we're defining open, we really want faculty to understand that by open, we mean free, of course, but free plus permissions. And this is often done by introducing and talking faculty through the different kind of Creative Commons licenses, where free plus permissions applies. Creative Commons is a way to communicate an author's intention in a way that communicates that traditional copyright wouldn't provide, since traditional copyright is all rights reserved. And we want this book to be free. We want it for students to be able to copy, to share, to keep, and to use it forever. So Creative Commons is the way that we can communicate that intention. Permissions means that any of these 6 permissions, depending on the license that's used, could be an option for an author. So any open book, often you'll be able to copy it, share it, keep it, and use it. Some Creative Commons licensees also allow derivatives, so editing, mixing, or remixing. That's what I've done with my open textbook, is to create a Creative Commons license that says, hey, you're able to create a derivative of this work. And we're going to talk about why having that option might be beneficial, and why having a Creative Commons license or an openly licensed OER can be really, really beneficial. And these are 4 ways that we can really highlight for faculty creative options for open beyond just free. And that's because that Creative Commons license can allow content customization, contextualization, inclusion, and opportunities for innovative pedagogy. When we think about content customization, for example, we might decide, we might decide that we don't need to teach the same statistical formulas over and over again, but perhaps we want to customize some of the worksheets in a way that makes sense for our students. For contextualization, I know, for example, that communication is highly contextual. And so for someone to adapt a public speaking textbook that is really Midwestern and US based without having to rewrite every single component is helpful for that contextualization. Inclusion allows us to update images, to make sure that we're, for example, creating examples that match our student experiences. And opportunities for innovative pedagogy mean that you're able to do or workshop around open pedagogy, creating open resources with students. And we actually have a session about open pedagogy on Thursday morning, which we hope to see you. So we go into more examples of each of those within that longer workshop. But when we think overall for faculty about why open, we can see that it reduces, of course, off the bat, the financial barriers for all students, because remember, open equals free. It can also facilitate the free exchange of knowledge and information. You know, when I look at the statistics of my public speaking book, it is downloaded in places of the world that I would have otherwise never have known. And being able to kind of provide the facilitation of that knowledge is something really special. It also gives more control to faculty through using that Creative Commons license and having some of those options that we talked about, like customization. Again, it can also be used for things like innovative pedagogy. And really, again, sharing is scalable when you think about who you want to provide access to. So again, at the end of the workshop, our goal is to then hook faculty to move towards engagement. And that's where you invite them to write a review. So what would happen is we invite faculty to take a look after the workshop. We give them oftentimes a 6-week window to be able to write that review, because sometimes deadlines are helpful. And then we invite them to adopt the book if it meets their needs, or to raise awareness by talking with faculty members about what's going on or what you've seen in your experience with the workshop or with reviewing a textbook. So again, what you can see there in that kind of truncated version of the workshop with faculty is really the introduction of key terms, thinking about what some of their main questions might be, really highlighting the problem, and thinking about how open could provide one solution. So we're going to take just about a 5-minute break. Again, we'd normally have a longer break in the 3-hour session, but let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll transition into how do we answer some of the tough questions that faculty might have. All right, folks, we hope you had a great 5-minute break. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to really dive in this section into answering hard questions. So we know, and this was very, very true for me when I first started presenting at the OEN, the idea, and we were doing a lot more in-person workshops, the idea of having faculty members ask me these questions, maybe I didn't know the answer to, or I was still really getting my feet wet with open, gave me an incredible amount of anxiety. And the nice thing about working in the OEN is they constantly reminded me that, look, faculty are trained to ask difficult questions. We want them to ask difficult questions. And we also want them to ask questions because it will provide us a lot of insight into what they know, the assumptions that they might have about open. And when they're asking you a question, it's an opportunity for you to not only answer, but invite a dialogue or a continued conversation. So again, remember that academia is all about tough questions. So, hard questions are what faculty are trained to do and what they're training students to do, to ask questions and to dig into ideas. So, the questions you receive might feel tough, but try to remember that they are a way for someone to connect with the material. And we're not going to leave you hanging. In this kind of part of the workshop, we're going to really practice and provide an opportunity to think about how we might answer some of those tough questions. But before we do that, a couple of reminders always. I did collegiate debate, and I always need to remember that it's not winning. There's no winning or losing when you're having these conversations, that we don't need to demonize folks. You will likely be entering this conversation with perhaps more awareness and education than that faculty member. So even if you get a question that you think is off base or unfair, it's helpful not to demonize. It's helpful to remember we're not selling anything, we're not a vendor. And really, I'm saying this to myself, being okay with your answer being, I don't know. I'm really unsure. Let me get back to you so that I can answer that in a way that's helpful. And letting faculty be the judge. Remember, again, faculty are experts in their areas. So inviting this conversation is a way to invite faculty to determine if and when an open resource would be beneficial for them or the classes that they're teaching. So now that we walked through some of the key faculty workshop components, we're going to transition by actually digging into some of the tough questions. And I'm going to pass to Cheryl here.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, now we're going to take some time to talk about how to respond to tough questions, skepticism, even criticism of open education. And we'll give you a chance to hear a few common questions and how we might respond to them. In the 3-hour version of the training, we give participants a chance to actually practice responding in breakout rooms as well. Uh, but we won't have time for that today. I do encourage you to practice with a colleague or a friend or a family member. That practice is important. And if we go to the next slide, please, Maggie. Yeah, practicing helps you feel more comfortable and confident responding to tough questions, whether they come from faculty, students, administrators, or your boss. And the first time I got a really tough question in a workshop, I'm sure I looked like a deer in headlights. I got flustered, but practicing helps you feel more prepared. And I love Maggie's advice about, it's okay to say, I don't know. Let's find out together, or I'll find out and I'll get back to you. Okay, next slide, please. So for this exercise, Maggie and I are going to switch roles. I'm going to be the faculty member, and she's going to be the OER program leader. And she is going to give me her worst possible answer, the answer I know she would never give in real life. her, her worst possible answer to the question, I hear these books aren't any good. Is the quality the same as other textbooks?
I don't know if you've opened a traditional publisher textbook recently, but they're trash. They're really garbage. So I think the only way, if you're interested in quality, to really care about what students' needs is to get an open book.
Okay. In the chat, go ahead and know what might be a little bit problematic about that answer, which again, I know Maggie would never give. Eh, Overblown, yeah, demonizing publisher content, and for all we know, that particular faculty member is an author of a publisher textbook and has a longtime relationship with Cengage or McGraw-Hill. Uh, yeah, it didn't come across as being empathetic or understanding or collaborative. Yes, yes. Uh, yes, some of the words here. It was a very good bad answer from Mickey. And now I'll give her a chance to answer in a more positive, empathetic, less aggressive way. Um, Maggie, I hear these books aren't any good. Is the quality the same as other textbooks?
Cheryl, I'm really glad you asked this question. It's a great one. What I'll do is share with you a link to the Open Textbook Library where you can see what other faculty members in your field have said about open books that you might be interested in.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide and kind of unpack that answer. If you could advance just a little bit more. Oops. Yes. So this time, Maggie acknowledged that this is a good question. You know, this quality question, as we talked about in brainstorming barriers, comes up all the time. So, you know, acknowledge that this is very common. um, Relying on the faculty members' expertise. They are the ones who are not only the subject matter experts, but they know the scope and the sequence and the learning objectives of their course. So pointing them to the open textbook library and encouraging them to look at reviews, they can select what's best for them. I am very careful never to make a quality determination of a textbook as an open education librarian. That's just not my place. I can point them to options, I can point them to reviews, but they have the academic freedom and the expertise to choose what will work best for them. And last of all, Maggie encouraged engagement and, you know, encouraging them to review a textbook or meet with me for a one-on-one consultation. And encouraging that engagement as a follow-up is a really good step in responding. Um, it's also important to acknowledge the quality question by saying some open textbooks, like OpenStax, are formally peer-reviewed, just like commercial textbooks. And we can kind of educate them about the publishing process of OER to alleviate some of those quality concerns. Okay, next slide, please. So now it's your turn, and we want you to spend about a minute drafting or starting to draft how you would respond to that quality question. You're probably going to get this question, if you haven't already, in some way. And it's helpful to find a way to respond that resonates with you and feels authentic. You can speak smoothly and confidently. Um, we're not going to share these this time, but we just want you to take a moment to practice how you would respond to that question. All right, I think that's been about a minute. So again, this is just a chance to start a draft. I encourage you to come back to it, refine it, try it out on someone. At a conference, I remember sitting around the table with faculty and we were doing this exact exercise, practicing how we would respond. And I tried out what I thought was a great answer on a faculty member, and they said, no, that would not resonate with me. So it's always helpful to get that honest feedback and to keep, you know, adjusting and refining your response. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So again, I'm going to ask Meggie to give her worst possible answer to this particular question. How do I find time to adopt an open textbook?
Well, it is your job to try and find the textbook that's the most important for students. And so I think any time during the week would be okay.
And in the chat, go ahead and I can tell from Maggie's reaction, she knows how that was going to be received. Uh, that is kind of a duck and run response. Again, an excellent bad response. Yes, good luck with that one. Yeah, a little cold, yes, yes. It could be more empathetic. Mm. Your job, yes, might not go over well. Yes, you're doing a very good job of picking up on what might be potentially problematic about that response. And so But this time I'm going to ask Meggie to give her real response. How do I find time to adopt an open textbook?
That's a great question, Cheryl. And I know now more than ever, time is a huge concern. So I'd suggest looking at the open textbook library when you're reviewing textbooks in your next adoption cycle. You could also look at the open textbook library for supplemental chapters or materials in your current courses, and I'd be happy to provide support and collaborate if helpful.
Ah, that felt so much better. Maggie's no longer hiding. Yes, acknowledging that it's a good question and that it does take time. So that empathy and, relationship building and encouraging them to explore during the next selection cycle, offering one-on-one help and suggesting an incremental approach. I think those are all really good ways to respond because revising an entire course can feel like a really heavy lift. So encouraging faculty to pilot just one piece of OER, even as a supplemental reading, can feel a lot more doable to faculty. And that piece of offering one-on-one support is really important too, and pointing them to all of the resources that you have available in your LibGuide or on your library website. Um, if you have instructional design support that you can offer, if you have a learning community that you can offer, offering that support is a really, really critical piece. All right. So next, we usually have you practice yourselves, and we divide people into breakout rooms and mix them up so that people are interacting with different people. Ask them to introduce themselves and take turns responding. And it's one thing to think about how you'll respond. It's another thing to actually say the words out loud and practice saying those words. And then in the breakout rooms, we encourage the group to give constructive feedback on how the responses can be improved. So I wish we had time for this activity today, but we're just going to let you know that this is part of the deck, and you can adapt it for your own needs. People seem to really get into this activity. Um, but for today, we're going to move on. These are some other possible questions the breakout rooms can address about ancillary materials. A lot of the topics that came up under the barriers, mandating payments for textbooks. And then we emphasize the tips that Meggie shared about not demonizing, being okay with I don't know, letting faculty be the judge. I do want to just respond to this particular question because it did come up in the barriers and has come up in multiple situations about inclusive access and now equitable access style programs. I'll say that this is a hot topic on my campus. Our campus store has been a longtime user of inclusive access and launched an equitable access style program called Pay One Price about 2 years ago. And the libraries were actually heavily involved. And we were invited to provide feedback, and we appreciated that our campus store invited us to have a seat at the table. And we thought it was important to be involved and help shape the program and make it as student-friendly and faculty-friendly as possible. So we ended up meeting weekly, which we continue to do to this day, and did joint presentations. So yeah, I have thoughts on inclusive access. Mickey, if you can advance the slides. Yeah, these are some possible talking points. And I'll say that the Open Education Network a few years ago, Bob Butterfield and I developed a talking points document about how to respond to questions about inclusive access. And we're working on updating that to include equitable access style programs, since those are spreading. But Yeah, I encourage you to reach out to your campus store and start a dialogue with them. Look for ways to build a win-win relationship for them or with them. Um, we found ways that this relationship is really beneficial for each of us. We can now load student ebooks and OER into the student book list alongside inclusive access and equitable access content. They provide us with enrollment data and digital book list prices that we can use to calculate student savings. So again, not demonizing the campus store or publishers, as tempting as it sometimes is to demonize publishers and some of their tactics, but focusing on that common goal of student success and faculty academic freedom, and that there really isn't one size fits all for course materials. And I think we need a lot of tools in our course material affordability toolbox, uh, and inclusive access might be one of them. Okay. So we now have time to get into the last phase of our workshop. Want to pause to see what questions you have. So I invite you to put them in the chat. Manisha, I see the question about how does this chapter about ceremonies fit with your course? Ooh, a link to the slides. Yes. Let me see if I can go back and grab that. I think I
Don't
can
worry,
get.
Cheryl. Tanya said they'll share the slides and the recording after.
Okay. Okay. I thought I could grab it super quick. I did find it. Okay. At my campus, there's a trust barrier caused by an earlier program the faculty got really invested in, but which was in the end not supported. Is it possible to start these conversations up again when people may still have bad memories? That's a great question. And historically, I've heard that there was a trust issue between our library and our campus store. We did a joint project, and that really helped build those relationships and that trust back. It can be a slow process to rebuild that trust. I think being transparent about, you know, yeah, that's not great that this didn't work out, but having those conversations about how you can move forward together and what each party would like to see different this time. Yeah, I think you have to acknowledge the past, but it also say, that that's in the past, and we don't want that to prevent us from doing great things in the future. That was an unfortunate experience, but let's do things differently this time. Yes, Amy shared a link to a piece that Nathan Smith did, analyzing when inclusive access and equitable access benefits students or not. Kristen says, I'd like to review adoption data, but this generally isn't posted on the OER platforms. Is it tracked and available on request, or is there another way to acquire it? Tanya, do you want to address that from the open textbook library perspective? I think it's been a conversation over the years about whether the open textbook library might be able to provide adoption data. But for now, I think there's some technical challenges around that.
My understanding is that we were investigating it, but I don't think we are doing it. However, Jamie Whitman is on the call. So Jamie, is that accurate or inaccurate?
Hi. So a lot of the individual textbooks that are in the Open Textbook Library, those publishers have put in different adoption forms. So you can always try to reach out to the individual authors or publishers of the textbooks to see if they have adoption data about that particular textbook that they've published. But as a whole, the Open Textbook Library doesn't have adoption data since we aren't the publishers. We're really just pointing out to all of these wonderful textbooks that folks have created. So we can't really capture that data at the moment. I will say though, one other option as members of our community is our data dashboard, where you can work with your faculty members to get individual adoption information from your own campuses. So you can sort of track that on your own. But as a whole, the Open Textbook Library doesn't have a way to track those adoption numbers.
And Kristen, I'll say that at the University of Arizona, where we use Pressbooks, we rely on the COCO analytics within Pressbooks and the referrers category to look at where traffic is coming from. And if it's an EDU site or a higher education site, that gives us a pretty good indication that it's been adopted at that university. So that's one way you can try to find out where a textbook that one of your authors has published has been adopted. I've also seen books have an adoption form that people can submit within the book to help authors track where it's been adopted. That adoption information is always a challenge. Bernice, I love this question. What are some ways to provide incentives to faculty? That is a great segue to the 2 to 3 p.m. session, the community conversation on engaging faculty in open ed when financial incentives aren't an option. So we hope you can join us for that session. We'll be talking about ways besides stipends to provide incentives to faculty, including one-on-one help, awards, and other types of recognition. Okay. I get responses that are more in line with, this is great work that you're doing, and I really support it, but it's not really relevant to me because we just need novels in my class. They're not expensive, and I require the print. When I get that kind of comment, I say, that's fantastic. That's, you know, um, not OER is not going to be the solution for everyone. And honestly, if it were, I could not keep up with the demand to help every single faculty member on my campus. So my approach is to really look for that low-hanging fruit or those great opportunities where an OpenStax solution exists for a course, because that's the closest thing to a course in a box that faculty are asking for, or if it's a really expensive textbook or a really large course. And so doing some of that targeted work with faculty, I'm completely fine if people say that the OER is not their solution. That's okay. Hopefully they've found a good solution that works for them. Okay, Will's question. Do you have any strategies for faculty who are fatigued by change programs across the board? We're in the middle of a curriculum transformation program, moving to 6-week teaching blocks, and at the same time, the department is being resized, namely reduced. Yes, I love those. um, yes, those terms. It's hard for the faculty to find the bandwidth to change to OER when all of this stuff is going on. Um, uh, uh, yes, I can relate to that so much. We're having budget issues and budget cuts and staff reductions and faculty reductions across our campus. And so, yes, how do people find the bandwidth among all the chaos to adopt OER? I think and Maggie, I'll be curious how you would react to this question, but I'll say that sometimes OER can feel like an opportunity for faculty to have a little more control over their course, to do that customization. Yes, it can be more work, but yeah, having them create course materials or adopt course materials or adapt them where they feel more engaging to students. And for a sabbatical research project, we surveyed students on their experience with open pedagogy, and they gave some great responses to, this made me feel like doing my best work. This made me feel more engaged. It felt more up to date. And so, that might be helpful to a faculty member who is struggling with this external chaos. And also going back to the pilot suggestion, and it doesn't have to be completely revise your syllabus. Just trying one piece to see how students react to it, whether they like it, what suggestions they would have for improvements. That can feel less overwhelming. Maggie, do you have a response to that one?
We also have been going through some curricular changes, shall we say. So I think I have a lot of empathy about that feeling of overwhelm. I think it can be helpful to think about, are there opportunities for collaboration? So what is the lift after a book has been considered? Is there a textbook committee that could be put in place? Are resources needed to be created before the book is adopted? I work a lot with graduate students, so using the adoption of an open book as an opportunity to talk about the creation of instructional resources from a pedagogical perspective. I think, like Cheryl mentioned, thinking about open pedagogy. So I use a lot more open pedagogy in my courses, and it's helped me reframe the belief that I have to come into the course at the beginning of the semester with everything finished, and instead really ask, what are some of the core learning goals that together with students we can create materials and resources, especially in kind of this era of AI, where I'm trying to think about more of a flipped classroom approach, more about what can we do in the classroom together. So, what is the lift? What's really needed? Are there opportunities for kind of scaffolding, figuring out those resources? Are there collaborative opportunities also?
Thank you. I am scrolling back through. How can time be strategically built for adjunct faculty to adopt or use open textbooks? Would sessional instructors get a release for one class? Co-creating content takes time. Should creating assignments be spread across courses? I would say this is a local decision. In my case, we do not have campus-wide course release compensation or campus-wide stipends for adopting, adapting, or creating OER. So we've been able to get some one-time gifts to compensate authors, and some authors have been able to get their own grants to support open education work, but it's really on a case-by-case basis whether that funding is available to you. You may be fortunate to have a consortia or a statewide network that provides funding. I totally agree that co-creating content takes a lot of time. uh, we, yes, authoring in general takes more time than I think faculty hope it will. So, any way that you can provide support in terms of templates or guides to help with that production process, or to point to existing resources. Pressbooks has a lot of great videos and a great user guide that I rely on all of the time. I'm not sure about Manifold. Maybe somebody in the chat can chime in. The OEN's Pub 101 curriculum is super helpful in supporting faculty in the production process. So Maggie, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, I think I just co-sign many of the things, of course, your amazing expertise. Yeah, great. Very well said, Cheryl.
Okay, let's see. I'm looking through to see if there are other, I appreciate the suggestions from folks in the chat. Okay. I hope I didn't miss other major questions, but let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Talking about what steps you're going to take. And, I attend a lot of webinars and OER conferences, and I always come away feeling really energized and, oh, I learned so many great ideas and met so many fabulous people. And then I get back to the office and I get buried in email and meetings. And sometimes some of that enthusiasm and momentum gets lost. But when I attended the textbook affordability conference, they had us do something that I thought was really smart at the end of the conference. And they had us write ourselves a postcard outlining a few steps that we were going to take after the conference. Concrete, I'm going to set up a meeting with student government. I'm going to ask for time on the math department's calendar. I'm going to take a look at how KU does its textbook heroes incentive program. And then they would mail it to us a few months later. And as a little gentle nudge to say, hey, have you followed up on these things? So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind this week as you hear all of this fabulous work that's happening around the world in OER and throughout the network. Um, to write yourself a reminder on your calendar or on your to-do list. Um, think about bite-sized things that you can actually do amongst all of your busy demands in your job. Um, One of the easiest activities and most beneficial that I ever did was just to post a whiteboard with the prompt. If I didn't have to buy textbooks, I could ... and then have students fill out sticky notes. And they went wild. And I got all kinds of really heart-rending responses that now I can share with administrators and faculty to kind of counter that. Well, why do we need to save students money on textbooks? They were talking about things like, hey, I'd be able to eat. I'd be able to, not have debt-induced panic attacks. So just kind of sometimes simple exercises, setting up a textbook petting zoo in the lobby of your library. I used to do this with print OpenStax books. I just put up a sign that said textbook petting zoo, come see what these look like. And inevitably somebody would pick it up and say, oh, this is a real textbook. And it just kind of helped give people a sense of what OER are. So yeah, on the next slide, Maggie, we'll give you a couple minutes to reflect on next steps that you can take for raising awareness, educating, or engaging in your own initiative. So go ahead and jot those down. And then as an additional step to follow up, I encourage you to, add some of these tasks to your calendar or your to-do list. And even a reminder in a few weeks, like, have I done this? I live with little reminders in my calendar to keep me on track. I'm also seeing some follow-up comments in the chat. Jamie shared that OSU has a really cool dashboard that they use to track data about OER usage, as well as an adoption form. Um, we have partnered with our campus store on the textbook adoption form to have a checkbox that says, I don't require my students to buy course materials, and they can indicate whether they are using OER or a library licensed ebook. We ask them to let us know what they're using, and then my colleagues and I follow up on that. It's always kind of a surprise what they actually are using. Sometimes they think it's OER and it will end up being a pirated textbook or something else. But it's also a good educational opportunity to check in with them and find out what they're using and have a conversation. Um, let's see. Yeah, I love Amy's comment here about asking the question creates an opportunity to build relationships. And that relationship building is such an important part of our work. Oh, I see the question about the which bookstore we have. We are fortunate to have a campus-owned store in rather than Follett or Barnes and Noble. So uh, they were able to make that edit in the system. Ah, interesting. For the community I serve, Facebook is used by students and community. Uh, Using Facebook to promote a book is a great idea. Last year, I worked with a campus-wide group on a culinary medicine textbook, and it was fascinating to look at the site traffic a few months after it was released. And LinkedIn and Facebook were the two of the highest referring sites. And it was because my colleagues had shared the project on their own LinkedIn pages and their own Facebook pages. I had shared it on disciplinary listservs. Uh, but yeah, in the certificate in open education librarianship training, we talk about marketing techniques and kind of two different approaches. There's the fire hose approach, where you just blast as many possible marketing channels as you can think of, and then the more strategic dartboard approach. And I think both can really pay off. You just never know what's going to get people's attention and what channels are going to work best. Maggie, do you have more to add to that? Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. All right, so we're getting down to the last 20 minutes here. In the chat, next, we'd like you to share something that you learned or a question that you have or a takeaway. Learned, let's look at reviews. Yeah, I think those are so helpful because they're written by faculty and instructors in their discipline area. And so they may recognize the name of a peer. Oh, I know that person. I respect that person. Okay. And I really like that they're very detailed. There's that 10 category rubric. And so people can get a good sense of the pros and cons of a particular book, what might be missing from it. And those reviews are also super helpful to authors who may be thinking of how to create their next edition and what improvements to make. So yeah, love the Open Textbook Library reviews. Oh, that's such a nice comment, Kat. I feel like I have an OER community now. This was very encouraging. Yay! This is such a fabulous community of people. So generous and supportive and enthusiastic and welcoming. It's my favorite group of people in my work. And I Yes. I'm glad you feel welcome. That's really what we wanted for today, and hope you've made some new connections, got some new ideas. Thank you for that comment. That means a lot. Yes, acknowledge the pain. People are hurting. It's tough out there, and I think having space to acknowledge that these are challenging times, and we're dealing with a lot, and there's a lot of uncertainty and fear and all kinds of stuff in the world. And so acknowledging that pain and showing grace to each other and being supportive, I think, it's just helpful in general. Annalise, feel more confident in the face of tough questions. Excellent. And Andrea, the tips for talking to faculty. Good. We're glad about that. The tip not to demonize IA, EA, and traditional publishing. Yeah, we've found in Faculty Senate when we tried to change policy around faculty authored commercially published materials that they have very strong feelings about their publisher relationships and their contracts. And yes, so I think that's good advice to IA and EA are not my go-to solutions. They're not my first choice. I advise faculty to look at them after we've exhausted all of the free to use options. But publishers won't sell us 80% of the required textbooks with unlimited user ebook licenses. And there isn't OER in every topic. So I think there's still a role for commercial publishing materials, and we need to give faculty as many tools as possible. Will says, learning to walk with the academic in the development of the curriculum and work iteratively. Yes, not necessarily massive jumps. That working iteratively, I think, can be really helpful in reaching out to a faculty member and not having them feel quite as overwhelmed. Manisha, I learned open equals free plus permissions in Indigenous knowledge, gifted with knowledge and permission to share. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Excellent. Kind of take away some of the camaraderie. Furnace says compassion is essential. Yeah, so much of this work, I think, is about relationship building, and I see my role as providing support and being a sounding board for people when they run into frustrating situations with their press books, and helping them to find solutions, working with them. Um, Manisha, um, the importance of those one-on-one relationships. Money is always fantastic if you can get it. That public praise and translating to find a champion. Yeah, in this afternoon's session, I'll be talking about how we provide Pressbook statistics that faculty can use in their dossiers to demonstrate impact. And other folks will be talking about awards that they give. And there's some great models out there for that public praise. And if it's an award, they can also put it in their dossier and put it in their annual review. But yes, those one-on-one relationships across campus, I think are super important to build with not only individual faculty, but other organizations across campus, not just your bookstore, but your teaching and learning center and your student success unit, your disability resource center, student government. There are all kinds of units across campus that are doing interrelated work, and we can work together. We actually partner with our teaching and learning center on Pressbooks. They pay for half and we pay for half at the library. And I co-lead a learning community with an instructional technologist from our teaching and learning center. And that's just been fabulous in terms of her having a whole different set of expertise than I have and different campus contacts, and they have different marketing channels. So that's been a great partnership. And I totally agree about, identifying those champions and building on your campus kind of that atmosphere for mutual support. I think in my experience, faculty prefer listening to another faculty member than me. uh, and so if I did a training last week actually at the library about Pressbooks, and I was talking about how to use it. And what they really wanted to hear from was the faculty member who had published in Pressbooks. And they wanted to schedule a potluck and just have an hour with her talking about her experience. So yeah, finding those champions. Oh, great. Thank you for sharing the blog post. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. We'll move on to the last slide, where we encourage you to celebrate small wins and big wins, but um, publicize what you're doing, the great work that you're doing, so that administrators are aware of it and faculty are aware of it. And this is an example from Ariana Santiago, where she published, celebrating small wins, feeling she's successfully involving subject liaisons in OER work, and she calls out particular people. So yeah, leveraging social media, leveraging other communication channels to really celebrate those small wins. All right, and now I'll pass things back to Tanya.
Thank you, Cheryl and Meggie, so much for facilitating this really helpful session. If today's session sparked ideas, questions, or thoughts, please know that we do have a space for continued discussion on this topic at 12:30 at the Tips and Best Practices for Hosting the Intro to OER Adoption session. Then we have a session later today about engaging faculty in Open Ed when financial incentives aren't possible. That's at 2 p.m. Central. And then we have a debrief at 3:15 Central today if you'd like to join us. And I've dumped the session line up there in the chat if you want to just take a look at what's for the rest of today or the rest of the week. We want to remind you that this session has been recorded. We will share it with you via email and post it to the Community Hub in the coming weeks. Slides and transcripts will also be linked. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope that you have a great rest of the day. Hope to see you in further sessions. Thanks again, Cheryl and Meggie. Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon.